Thank you for joining me today. I'm Ben Satchwell, Head of Capabilities over here at Acorn. It's great to be here as part of SFIA Week and today to be exploring with you how you can integrate frameworks and taxonomies for success. All right, before we get into the how, I wanted to share sort of what credentials, what I've been doing in the industry, because upon reviewing the attendee list, there's a lot of names that I didn't know, even though I know the organization. So quick introduction, as I said, head of capabilities over here at Acorn. So I've spent the last 5 years or so helping organizations embed capability, competency, and skills frameworks into real decisions. So I've got coming up to 20 years corporate experience across technology, business, and HR. I have my degree from the University of Surrey, but like many in our profession, continuing my education. So I've got taken programs from sort of the likes of Stanford, UC Irvine, Rice Uni, Macquarie, etc. I also, for the last 2 years, have been facilitating the RE course on developing a capability framework. I am also a regular contributor to Training Journal magazine. So while I talk about this isn't just theory for me, it's what I do every day. I'm a big advocate for SFIA, as I believe we all benefit if we can adopt a shared language for skills. I have intended to, as part of this, leave the chat open, so the meeting chat. So I believe you can all drop messages in there. Please do take the opportunity to engage with each other. You can critique, you can join in, and we'll have time for questions at the end, because the goal is that we all learn together, essentially. For those of you who don't know Acorn, so Acorn really quickly is a software as a service HR company. So predominantly a capability platform, so a system built to help organizations design, manage, and measure capability in one place. I'd say more importantly, though, we're not a framework, so we don't have our own framework that we use. What we do is we bring together SFIA and the ILS leadership models, technical standards, and so on. So whatever an organization already uses today, our goal is always to make them work together. So our job's to integrate, basically. Alrighty, so let's get into today's talk. So I'll start with a rhetorical question for you. How many frameworks does your organization actually use today? So not just the ones that get the most airtime, but all of them. So leadership frameworks, compliance standards, technical taxonomies, cultural models, value-based approaches, all those sorts of things. So in the larger organizations, if you really add them up, the number is commonly a bit larger than people expect. And this brings me to a belief I hear pretty regularly. If we just had one framework, everything would be a lot simpler for us. So that's an attractive idea because it promises consistency, it promises clarity. So I find that the senior business leaders especially like the sound of it. One model to align everyone, one language across the business, one framework to rule them all. But with the work I do, there's a bit of a problem that I see in that. The belief also is one of the sort of biggest myths. So it's holding the larger organizations back. It is very much possible in a smaller organization to adopt a single framework, such as SFIA 9. But in those larger organizations, typically no single framework can cover every aspect of capability. So when I review them, I've reviewed them over the years, they all have blind spots. They're each designed for a specific purpose, but the reality is that capability is bigger and more complex than any one framework can typically capture. Just a point of clarification as well, when I say integration, I don't mean equivalence. So it's about coexistence, complementarity, and interoperability between frameworks with distinct purposes as we dig into that. All right, so let me give you a simple story to bring this to life, right? So imagine the Department of Widgets, a fictional organization that looks like many of the real ones we've worked with. So they start out potentially with a really robust leadership capability framework. So something that's designed to help managers and leaders align behaviors and expectations. Over time, more layers get added. A compliance standards framework for their industry comes in, so they've got to meet regulatory obligations. Then some sort of technical taxonomy is introduced to give structure to specific specialist skills and roles in that regulated environment. And then finally, along comes SFIA, bringing in depth on digital and technology skills, right? So each of these frameworks was created with a good reason, but when you look at the whole picture, on occasion, the result can be messier than anyone planned. So based on my conversation, leaders are trying to sort of reconcile sometimes competing models. We do find that employees can be a bit confused on which framework matters, and then your organizations can end up with some sort of overlap or duplication, that sense of like framework fatigue. So from what I review, it's not that the frameworks are bad individually. It's the sort of lack of integration that creates the problem. So for the purposes of this talk, that's what I'm going to refer to as the single framework fallacy, right? So in these bigger organizations, it's the idea that one framework can do it all. So capture leadership, technical, cultural, professional capabilities in one like neat package. And again, to the point I made, it does sound appealing, but for the work we do, I'm not seeing that it always holds up in practice. To bring it to life a little bit, think of it like a city map, right? Or a city, I should start with. You might have the street map that shows you how to get from one suburb to another. You might also have a transport map that enables bursts and train lines. And you might have a zoning map that shows where houses or businesses and parks are located, right? So each of those maps is useful, but none of them tells you everything you need to know. So frameworks, for me, work the same way. So a leadership framework, leadership capability framework gives one lens. SFIA gives another, the certain type of compliance framework another. So they each illuminate part of the picture, but expecting one to cover everything is a bit like asking a transport map to tell you where the hospital is and schools are if it simply wasn't designed for that purpose. So getting into the conversations, if there is the attempt to sort of force that one framework, the sort of trying to distill down and think, what are the three themes that I see, right? So the first is usually like over complexity. So they're starting to like bend the framework to cover things it was never designed for. So that way you end up like the language gets a bit stretched, the categories multiply, and before long the framework becomes like actually harder to use than easier. The second outcome is that loss of nuance. So when you try to squeeze leadership behaviors and technical skills and cultural values into the same structure when they were never meant to be that way, something in there is going to get watered down, right? And it loses that sort of nuance or meaning. You end up with like generic statements that don't guide real decisions, and I find that the richness and the value, therefore, of each domain has the risk of being lost. And the third outcome, a really big one here, is that this is the potential to drive employee disengagement. So they're going to stop paying attention when the framework doesn't speak to their reality. So we don't want it to look good on paper. We want it to actually have utility. So, and we certainly don't want the managers to see it as some sort of compliance exercise, rather than a tool that actually helps them lead and develop their people. So the original purpose, to build capability, it sort of gets buried under that sort of frustration and fatigue. And then sort of when we sort of step back a little bit and look across capability, these are sort of the multiple domains, right? So on the technical side, you have SFIA, which is incredibly strong. Then you've got leadership requires a slightly different lens based on your organization. So that's why sort of leadership capability frameworks are around. Then bake in your behavioral, values-based, cultural, ethical, etc. There's compliance frameworks in there in those regulated industries that I mentioned before. So each of these domains matters, and each is built for a reason. But again, going back to the challenge being, in the larger organizations, can one framework truly cover them all? Because if you go that approach actually leaves you with a few blind spots. And again, that's because of the boundaries of the frameworks, capability being very multidimensional. So I always think to understand it properly, you need to see it through like multiple lenses, not trying to force it, basically. And this is where SFIA 9 comes into the picture. So I believe SFIA is the most comprehensive and widely adopted framework for those digital and technology skills. So its real strength obviously lies in the depth it provides in describing those standardized technical skills and competencies, right? So the reason I'm such a fan is it gives organizations that consistent language for skills that can otherwise be hard to define. So how do we take this already excellent framework, and I think of it more as supercharging it? So ultimately, SFIA isn't designed to sort of completely replace those leadership capability frameworks that you have. So if you try to use it in that way, you'll sort of run the risk of falling into the same trap that I've been talking about so far. So I don't see it as sort of choosing between SFIA and or a leadership capability framework that might be out there, or SFIA and a values framework that you've seen. So for me, it's not either or, it's sort of additive, right? So it's about layering SFIA into the mix, so it strengthens the total picture of capability without displacing what's already working. So up to this point, we've seen the problems arise when organizations try to force one thing to cover all. As I stated, I don't see frameworks themselves as broken. We regularly speak to people who have maybe been burned by a project they've done with capability or competency or skills frameworks, whatever it may be. But the majority I see are very good. I think and they do the specific job that they were designed for. The real probably observation I have is that the problem is that fragmentation, right? Or it sits in a PDF or it sits on a shelf somewhere and it's disconnected. So leaders do try to reconcile them manually, but employees get mixed messages. That's another thing I see. And the reality is then the organizations never see that full picture of the capability. And that's where the sort of frustration and fatigue I mentioned sort of kicks in. So when I think about the problem is the lack of integration between them, it's that integration that then what turns the collection of maps into like that coherent view of the city that I was talking about. So they're complementary pieces of a bigger whole, moving from confusion to clarity, if you will. Alrighty. So you sort of they're the sort of challenges I observe and the problems around that, and integration sort of being the key. So changing gears a little bit, the next question is like, how do you actually do this? And I think I always think that the good news is there's not one way that I've observed this being done. We all worry about one best practice, so to speak. I prefer a term proven practices. It's worked in one organization doesn't mean it's exactly right for you. You've got to understand the dynamic nuance of yours. So trying to distill it down, I observe sort of three models that organizations are using to integrate various different type of frameworks, and this is with SFIA at the heart of it all. On the slide there, what you can see at the simplest end is you can take an overlay approach. So that's basically, I'll dig into that shortly, but it's aligning something like SFIA to an existing capability levels that you have. Beyond that, there's the hybrid model, so where frameworks remain separate but are deliberately mapped. And then at the most advanced end, you can build a sort of ecosystem view where each framework becomes like a node in a connected system. So as I say, I'll run through each of them, but before we jump into the sort of free integration models, I want to sort of pause for a moment on something that seems foundational, but it is key to get this across, because it's an area that's commonly misunderstood when people start the mapping exercise. So think of SFIA's levels as levels of responsibility, right? So SFIA doesn't describe seniority or technical mastery in a linear way in that regard. It describes scope of responsibility and impact. So level 3 isn't like junior, and level 7 isn't expert like you'll see in some frameworks. They represent different kinds of contribution. So a level 5 professional might be a genuine subject matter expert delivering major outcomes, while a level 6 or 7 role extends that influence, so leading, directing, shaping policy, etc. So the value of SFIA levels is that they let us talk about accountability and autonomy consistently across professions, whether that's engineering, design, data, etc. So I think once that's clear, we can look at how different frameworks connect to SFIA responsibly, not by like forcing level to level equivalence, but by aligning intent and responsibility. Cool. All right. So with that foundation in place, let's look at 3 practical ways that the organizations can integrate frameworks alongside SFIA. All right. So the first one I mentioned was the overlay model. So I actually led a project in this structure in 2024 with one of the big 4 banks here in Australia as they move to be a skills-driven organization. Here in this sort of situation, you take SFIA and align it directly to the levels that already exist in your organization with other frameworks. So, for example, if you use a leadership levels like emerging, developing, advanced, etc., you overlay SFIA onto that same structure. And it's simple and it works because it avoids duplication. So people tend not to need to learn a new sort of scale. So they see the technical competency described in a language that matches what they already know. What I see is that gives a consistent sort of backbone across frameworks. So bringing that back to the city map terms, that's like taking a transport map and overlaying it onto your existing street map. So you're not building a new map from scratch. You're just layering extra information on top of what's already familiar. So the two can be read together, essentially. Alrighty, so the second approach is like a hybrid model. So in this case, you don't try to like force frameworks into a single structure, but you also don't leave them entirely separate either. So instead, you deliberately map where they sort of intersect while allowing each to keep its own identity. I was looking around online and cross-referencing with the attendee list for this talk. And I think the best example I can find that I'm a fan of is the Australian Public Service, the APS data capability framework. So that's on the left of the slide here. And you can see that SFIA 9 levels are mapped to the APS work level standards. And I know it's a bit smaller on the slide, so I put the sources at the bottom. And then on the right-hand side there, what we've got is the ILS, and you can see the work standards too in the work level standards there as well. So I've just screen grabbed one of the ILS APS 6s there. So what that's doing is that's creating a connection and meaning, but not like a complete dependency like the overlay approach. So I think of it like it's about like a connection, but without collapse almost. So in city map terms, so going back to the analogy around that, this is like keeping your street map, your transport map, and your zoning map separate, but building those clear points of reference across them. So the bus map shows the same landmarks as the street map, the zoning map references the same neighborhoods. You can move between maps confidently because the anchors line up, essentially. Cool. All right. Then lucky last, the third one, the third approach is the ecosystem model. So this is probably the most advanced way of integrating, one could argue, because it treats each framework not as a standalone tool, but as part of like a connected network. So instead of aligning or translating one to another, you build like that architecture that recognizes the unique role of each framework and how they interact. So For example, SFIA provides the depth in the digital skills. The leadership framework covers behaviors, values, model, anchors, culture, etc., etc. So the ecosystem approach makes all of these sort of visible and linked. So the organization and leaders can see the total capability picture, and then employees can navigate seamlessly between these domains. So pulling it back to the city map again, it's sort of like building your master atlas almost. You don't just have individual maps lying around, you have this very intentional coordinated system that shows how the transport map, the street map, and the zone maps are connected, but each one still has its own ownership and value. But the ecosystem makes them sort of part of a bigger coherent whole, if you will. And then another example, and again, excuse that you might need to zoom in. I'll make sure the slides come out afterwards. And again, all the sources are here. So this is the one I'm probably the biggest fan of with the Queensland government. So the left-hand side, smaller image there, what we're looking at is how they have mapped the SFIA classifications to the award equivalents in Queensland government. Then in the middle here, we have from the leadership competencies for Queensland PDF, just grabbed the 5 levels there. And then this all comes together at the role level on the right-hand side there, where I've made pretty hasty GIF, but I hope it brings to life. The link really does it a lot of value. So pick the role of a capability manager, and then you can see the showing it the SFIA profile at the moment. Then it goes down to the leadership competencies as well. So even though I do work with a few Queensland government agencies, I wasn't part of this work. So I'm more sharing this as a public-facing example of what I think good looks like. So please do check out the links. All right, so where does that leave us, right? So from my own experience, one of the biggest stall points in the larger organizations is when they chase this idea of a single framework. So you like don't necessarily pour all your energy into building that or buying that one model to cover everything, and then get stuck inevitably when it falls that little bit short, because I see that's where sort of momentum is lost, and momentum is obviously key, right? So it's being very accepting that the different frameworks have different purposes and focus. And so then move your focus instead onto connection. That's where the capability conversation actually sticks, because people can see each framework adding value without competing. And then I think another one is that integration can't just live in theory, right? You need a way to bring the frameworks together so they're visible in one place. And yes, that's where platforms like Acorn come in, because we're the enabler to that, not the hero. And there's other platforms out there as well, but it's moving off those spreadsheets and making sure there's no scattered fragments. Alrighty, so this sort of duplicates it. I think to sort of got where I'm coming across with the term around fragmentation and how success lies in total capability thinking. One last thing from me is I'm a big believer in community. That's what SFIA Week's all about. So I was on a really good roundtable yesterday, and I just wanted to shout out that a lot of the registrants for this are from the wider public sector in Australia. So there is a AU SFIA Practitioners Forum here, so you can connect with the APSC via the email and the details on the screen here, and a great place to sort of share ideas. Alrighty, so that brings us to the end of the session. Thank you all for listening and sort of engaging in the topic. Hope today has sparked some ideas about how you can approach capability slightly differently in your own context. And on that note, I thought I would stop sharing and open it up to any questions while we're all on together. So I'll just look in the chat here. So integration presumes a common language. What is the best approach for dealing with conflicting terminology? E.g., service can mean many different things to many different people depending on context. Yeah, Michael, that's really it, right? So, I didn't talk about it a whole heap, but one of the big things was duplication, and it's one of the key bits in sort of management of this as well. So, dealing with conflicting terminology. So first of all, it depends, like without going into the meaning of words and definitions, it depends on the role of each one. So if you look at a skills taxonomy that underpins or is the foundations of, say, role-based competency frameworks, like more like technical for past looking. And then you look at capability frameworks as like the team and up, potential and looking forward. If it's very clear on the definition or role of each one within the organization, when I look at a few, at that point, you can easily more easily differentiate terminology. It's a bit of a waffly way of getting around to it, but if you know the purpose behind it, you can then quickly deal with anything that's conflicting, right? The other thing is it goes into the difference between sort of a skill, which is very granular, and why there's a lot going on around skills based and skills driven at the moment, because it gives us something more clear and tangible. And there's a bit more conceptual around, well, what is service excellent as a capability, because it means different things to different people. So that's, I think, the long story short, Michael, the answer is if it's understanding of which of the frameworks, at that point you can drill into its purpose, which means at that point you can drill into its definition and understand if it's duplication and whether it needs to be rewritten. Thank you all for joining. You'll receive an email with the slides. The slides are a little bit text heavy, but what I wanted to do was, yes, it was a talk, but I also wanted to put all the links in and make sure there was at least something that you could use as well. So thank you all so much, and appreciate you joining me today.